talking to folks who've been here for 20 years or so, and they're like, I've never seen a general wage increase like this.
$7.50.
That I see that as quite big.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Teddy Ostro is a journalist. He is a freelance journalist, and he is host of the Upsurge podcast. That is a podcast that has been going on for some time now about this fight between the Teamsters and UPS. He's been covering these contract negotiations long before anybody in the mainstream media has, before they realized that this was going on. Our first coverage of this, I believe, was almost exactly a year ago when we brought on Brother Tony Rosario from New York, Local 804, to talk about the contract negotiations and the contract campaign negotiations had not begun yet. But nobody has been as thorough and as consistent in their coverage as Teddy. So we're really excited to have him on to talk about this. Teddy, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me again. Nice to see y'all.
Yep, you too. So let's go ahead and talk about this tentative agreement. That's what's on everybody's mind over the last week or so. The tentative agreement was announced on Tuesday. The highlights went out, and the full contract actually went out pretty soon after that. It was Wednesday or Thursday that the full contract came out. So, now everybody's had at least a couple of days to read the contract. I wouldn't imagine that most of us have read the full thing. I've taken a look at some of the articles, but Teddy, talk to us about what's in the TA and put it in context.
Sure. Yeah. I did read through the whole thing. I am not a lawyer, so I've been talking to a bunch of people to try to fully understand it. I don't know if I'm fully there yet. Probably most of the membership hasn't actually read the whole thing, and they aren't fully there yet. Some of the folks I trust deeply are still trying to understand some of the language because this is complicated stuff. So I just want to preface it that way. There's a lot of stuff in it. I can go through just quickly some of the most important things. I think a lot of it has already been talked about on this show. For one, they did eliminate the two-tier driver system, which was an enormous sticking point, which really was the impetus for, electing Sean O'Brien in 2021. And for this contract campaign, that was one of the biggest key issues. So they did eliminate that, which is a huge deal. And this is setting precedent for other companies to delete their own tiers, to abolish their own tiers, such as the, auto contracts that are coming up, big three auto contract expirations for the UAW. That's a huge part of their mandate. Right. So moving on, we can talk about the raises. There was a general wage increase of $7.50, which, there's a lot of talk about wages, but $7.50 general wage increase compared to the last contract. That is very, very good. Some people are making even more, across the contract. Let's see. If we keep going, there's seems to be more going into pensions. We still have to wait on that for the supplementals to come out and see.
Paul Prescott in the chat mentioned that that there's some really significant pension improvements, like even $1,000 a month more in some cases.
Right. Yeah, I think there's $1,000 increase in the monthly pension payout for 60,000 workers in the central and southern regions. I have to say this is one of the things that I am trying to understand right now, and I'm talking with some folks, so I can't speak heavily on this, but from what I hear, there is a significant increase for a sizable number of the workers. But again, I want to hear from some folks after talking about the supplementals. Full-time jobs is also really a big one, important thing. They created 7,500 new full-time inside jobs, 22 threes they're called according to the contract. And this is a pretty big deal because last time in 2018, they said they wanted to create 5,000 new full-time jobs. It wasn't, however, there were loopholes about what those jobs would be. what is really desired is full-time jobs inside the warehouse, right? And creating these from part-time jobs, giving part-time workers the opportunity to get full-time jobs. And this has just simply not been the case since the last contract. And even further back, some of the wins from 97, from 2002 weren't fulfilled because of basically the previous administration didn't want to fulfill them. They didn't care to, enforce the contract, which is very necessary. Anyway, so there's 7,500 new full-time jobs, which is a big deal. And it doesn't appear like there's any sort of loophole to fill these jobs with other jobs, give it to full-timers. This seems pretty concrete, but it will be up to the union to, I think, enforce it again. Moving on to working conditions, there apparently will be no driver facing cameras, or at least the audio and video functions will be disabled, which is was a big demand last year, especially when we were comparing UPSers were comparing the lack of air conditioning in the package car. Meanwhile, the surveillance device that was being introduced in some package cars, presumably to discipline the drivers. So additional to that is that they can't use some of the other technologies. They can't use them solely for discipline, or they have to use other factors to discipline drivers. There are remaining driver facing sensors that will be used for training purposes. But yeah, it looks like that these are out. They're not fully out of the package car perhaps. But this appears to me like a gain. Of course, we all know about the air conditioning and new package fleet starting in next year with purchased package cars. And you can stop me at any point. I'm just going through because there's a lot in this. And these are some of very important wins, and we can get to whether, the reaction of the membership. But air conditioning in new package cars, heat shields and ventilation retrofitted, within 18 months, basically the entire fleet. This should be helpful to some folks. I mean, I know some people were concerned that it won't affect the entire fleet super soon, but nonetheless, it's better than, from my perspective, it's better than having no air conditioning and no heat shields and no ventilation.
Right. It
as
really
I keep
is
going.
Amazing. I mean, just to dwell on that for a second, that UPS has made it so long without putting air conditioning in their package cars.
Yes.
Like, this is not an expensive thing to do at all. And the idea that they just haven't done it for so long is wild to me.
Yeah.
And just to linger there for a second, and we can continue talking about the specific provisions in the contract, but maybe it's important in the tentative agreement, but maybe it's important to just linger on here for a second, which is this was unthinkable about a year ago. That something as simple as air conditioning would be put in the package car. And you have to ask, why did they get it? And it's what you said earlier in the show, which is they launched a year-long contract campaign. They organized like hell. They mobilized, they educated people. I mean, especially in the past month or so, by mobilizing people, organizing people into practice pickets, rallies, parking lot meetings, really thousands of members going into some of these webinars, especially with the help of Teamsters for a Democratic Union. They built a credible strike threat. And by doing that, that is the only reason they are getting, what appears to be a number of really big gains. Of course, there are questions that some members are having, and I don't know, we can talk about it if you'd like, about they want to win more. But the narrative here, I think, in this TA is that workers fought and they won. And this is going to have reverberations around the labor movement. I think that's really important to linger on the point, and I can continue going through some of the stuff. There's other big important things in this that we can talk about as well, like eliminating forced overtime, the sixth punch specifically. Basically, workers were made to come in, they were able to be forced in on the sixth day. Now that won't be the case. You can work that sixth day if you want to. You can't be forced in to do it. And this was a huge demand by package car drivers specifically. And to be specific about it, package car drivers won't be able to be forced in on the sixth day. I think other workers will be able to. But for package car drivers who were forced in 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, especially during like the height of the e-commerce boom and the pandemic, this is life-changing stuff.
Absolutely.
Now to keep going, Martin Luther King Day is a paid holiday. It does look like there are some provisions to prevent specifically semi-truck driver work called feeder work in UPS, to prevent some subcontracting of that work. That is another field that is far more complicated, and I'm trying to talk to some folks to really understand what's going on there. It looks like they're limiting personal vehicle drivers. Those are the gig drivers. They're not completely gone, but they're limiting the peak season in which they were able to operate, and as well as they're giving priority to part-time workers in order to take those roles with an 8-hour guarantee. Part of the problem with this stuff is that specifically the gig work is there was kind of like a free-for-all about how these folks could be treated around the country. This is now, it's more concrete about how these guys are going to be treated. Some people had car insurance provided by UPS, others didn't. Now they're all going to get insurance. They're all going to get mileage reimbursements. And so, they're not gone, but it does look like the practice will be more curtailed. And yeah, I may have missed some stuff, and we can dig into some things. I didn't dig deep into some of the stuff that some UPSers out there probably wanted more from. But overall, what we're looking at is like a contract that is far, far better than 2018, probably far better than those in the past few decades.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
You and I were talking yesterday, I think, about Jane McAlevy's article in The Nation, and we felt like that framing was just so good that there really are, genuinely a lot of gains here. One of the things that you didn't mention was the part-timers, that there have been a lot of part-timers that have been organizing for $25 an hour, and so $21 an hour definitely falls significantly short of that. But there are people across the country and right here in Alabama who are part-timers working for $15.50 an hour. And so if this contract goes through, or if it doesn't go through and they get something better, but just on the $21 an hour, thinking about, as of August 1st, having a $5.50 an hour raise for hundreds, thousands of workers across the state of Alabama, across the country, that's huge, right? And of course,
it's enormous.
It is. I mean, it is enormous, and the 21 an hour is certainly not enough in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York, and that was a really big part of the 25 demand there. But even what is in the tentative agreement is, I mean, it's a lot better, right? What was the do you remember the increase in the raises from the 2018 contract, for comparison's sake?
This is something I've been meaning to do, so I won't be able to tell you right now. I'm trying to do as much comparison as possible. I'm also looking back to 97. So I don't know. What I do know and can tell you is I'm talking to folks who've been here for 20 years or so, and they're like, I've never seen a general wage increase like this. So that I see that as quite big.
Yeah, $7.50 over per hour at a minimum over the next 5 years.
Right. And just apologies to not specifically talk about like the part-time stuff, because that is what the contract talks broke down on July 5th, came back to the table. This is presumably what they were negotiating and to settle on this, right? So $7.50 general wage increase, it could be actually substantially larger than that for some folks,
right?
Because basically what's happening is if you're under 21, if you're a part-timer and you're under $21 an hour, you either get the first year you get $275 immediate raise, or you boost right up to $21 an hour, whichever one's higher. Then certain part-timers who have longevity, 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, there's a scale. You are going to make an extra 50 cents to $1.50 an hour more. So some folks are getting $7.50, some folks are getting more than that. So these wage increases, up to interpretation, whether they're what people, I think we can safely say they're not what people deserve. People deserve far more. Folks probably deserve, people were talking about how these full-time drivers don't deserve $49 an hour. I would say they deserve a lot more than that. I would say the part-timers deserve a lot more than 21 or 25 or 30, but in relative terms, and especially for this labor movement, this time, workers fought and they got enormous gains in this tentative agreement.
Exactly, and that's and there's been a lot of there's been a lot of people echoing some of those things that Jane said in that article from The Nation. Paul mentioned it in the chat today. Paul Prescott, he's been on the show before. He's an organizer for Teamsters for a Democratic Union. I have one of their shirts on right now that I got at Labor Notes last year. And he said that it's important and possible and I think necessary, right, to hold these two things in your head, that this is not, there weren't, as far as we can tell, concessions. The Teamsters didn't give anything to UPS, and they got more than they have at least since '97, and that is because of everything that's happened over the last year. But and if you don't recognize that there was work done, and it was to a degree successful over the last year, because so many people put in so many hours over the last year on this contract campaign. And if you can't recognize that won things at the bargaining table, then, it does kind of become disempowering if people, run around calling this a, like a sellout contract, right? I mean, there's a difference between we deserve more and I believe we can get more and saying it's a sellout contract, right?
Exactly. We talked about this the other day. I think we can look, I'm talking to members right now, and like tons and tons of members. I think I told you I must have at least talked to over 50 at this point, individual people from around the country. And like what I'm hearing is the predominant thing I'm hearing is this is a solid contract. We won. Mm-hmm. But there is some sense, right, that we could have won more. And that's a healthy thing to believe. Yes. And that's actually incredible that you are like, you won this contract, this tentative agreement. It's not, we still have to see whether it's going to be voted up or down, but to believe that you have the power to have more. That's an incredible thing. For example, as far as I can tell, you're right. I don't see, I guess it depends on your definition of concession, but I don't see any concessions. A lot of folks are talking about one specific thing that it looks like there's a new wage tier. Arguably there's a new wage tier among part-timers because newcomers will be on a progression that will make them seemingly until the next contract permanently, making less than current part-timers. Mm-hmm. And that's arguably a tier, right? But it's a little bit different than like the 22.4 second tier driving, which is new hires didn't get things right. They didn't have 9.5 rights, the excessive overtime rights, and they got less money than the first tier drivers. That's a concession. Here, one group is getting a bigger boost than the other, but both are getting boosts. And you can debate all day. I'm not going to say one thing or another about whether they should do this or should not do that. I'm not a UPS worker. You guys are the ones who are watching. You guys are the ones who are going to decide whether or not this is enough for you guys. But that we have to be real about what we're looking at. That's not a concession. That's not a concession. And yeah, the folks who I'm talking to, as I said, I'm, looking at this from the outside. there is a feeling that like what in my mind I'm like, what could have been won with a strike? What could this country look like with a strike? Or as Jane McAlevey asked in that Nation article, what would this strike have looked like if they had delayed negotiations to line up with the auto workers contracts, right? The big three contracts that expire in mid-September. What could be, what's the reality of what could have been won? Those are really healthy and really important questions to ask.
Like how much leverage, a power analysis, like Jane talks about.
Exactly.
Do we have enough power to win more? And I think, I mean, I think you and I are, or at least I am, I won't speak for you, I'm sympathetic to the argument that there is more on the table. But also, like you said, that is for the UPS Teamsters to decide, and one of the things that we want to do with bringing you on and over the next week or so is helping people to get educated. And while I'm talking about helping people get educated, there are a couple programs on YouTube that are run by Teamsters that are really good at this stuff, and that's Roswell Hub and the Biweekly Grievance. Both of those run by UPS Teamsters, and on the Roswell Hub they just put up 2 hours, a 2-hour video of like line by line through the contract with Greg Kerwood. So he's doing God's work. Doing God's work, absolutely. So definitely check those out if you're a UPS Teamster. We've only been able to get to the highlights right now. And some of the member reactions, and what you're seeing is similar to what I'm seeing. We got this text message last week saying, "Hello, Mason from UPS Local 89 in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I just got word that new hires and anyone under 21 will now receive $21 an hour effective immediately. It seems like the strike will not happen now, and it's so exciting." And then there are people in the like I've seen people in the chat saying more or less, and I apologize, I'm not going to be able to say your name because it's been going by fairly quickly, but saying more or less, this is a good contract, and therefore I'm voting yes. And then there are other people that are saying, it's a good contract, but we could get more, and so I'm voting no.
Right.
And that seems to be kind of where the membership is right now.
And I'll say also, like, I actually sort of polled some of my friends who are online but aren't following this as much as me. I'm kind of like, what are you, like, I asked genuinely, like, what are you seeing? Someone who's not me, someone who's paying attention, literally talking to dozens and dozens of workers. And they see stuff, they see some of the critique, they see the excitement, and they're kind of like, okay, I guess there's like, this is kind of a win. And thankfully, I think there's more and more coming out that is just emphasizing that this is a win. And even some of the folks I think who were like had emotional reactions to the highlights, to a first glance at the at the actual contract language. Let's remember, this came out, the highlights came out on Tuesday. I believe the actual language came out on Thursday. It's been a hell of a week, forgive me, but people are having emotional reactions. People are reading it. People don't fully understand it, or they do understand it and they're upset, or they're incredibly happy. So the voting will take place between August 3rd and August 22nd. There's a lot to learn. The UPSers are going to talk to each other, going to learn from each other. They're going to think about this. Thankfully, we have people to kind of put it in perspective, like Jane McAlevey. Also, other folks, I think, out there, Luis Felice Leon has been taken to Twitter to really, put this all in historical context, which is really, really valuable. People need to understand
I'm
that.
Sorry, we're going off the radio now. See you next week, radio folks. Sorry, I kind of. Okay, now we're off the radio. Sorry, I totally lost track of time. And so now we're. So yeah, we can wrap this. We can keep going, and so continue your thought. I'm sorry.
Oh no worries. I think I mostly completed the thought, which is we need to like understand this in historical context. We need to trust the workers to make their own decisions. I've seen some people take to Twitter or other, and also I hate to keep talking about Twitter because that's not real life, but or it can be partially real life. But folks trying to tell people what they should and should not do, and they're not even Teamsters. I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to tell you what to do, which is don't do that. Support the workers and what their decisions are. right? And I am on the edge of my seat to see what's going to happen. I think it would be disingenuous not to say that there are folks out there who are pushing for a vote no, publicly. And
Right.
will that succeed? We will have to wait and see. I'm sure there's folks in the chat who are saying vote no, vote yes. This is up to the UPSers to decide, and we're gonna watch. This is not over yet, and I think a lot of media has irresponsibly kind of talked about this. It's a done deal, and unfortunately, what that does is that deleverages sort of all the power that UPSers have built. Of course, it's not all gone, but to say that there's a deal, suddenly the workers are striking rather than UPS striking itself. I think media, we need to keep pushing also on mainstream media to cover this accurately and appropriately.
I agree. I do, a regular segment on a conservative radio show here in the area, and that's kind of how he framed it. It was like, oh, so there's no strike, and I was like, that's up to the members. The members get to vote on this, and it's important that we recognize that because unlike so many workplaces, there's some amount of democracy in the Teamsters and
right.
UPS, and that's super important to emphasize. And so the members do have the members are going to have the final say, and we'll see what happens. And I can certainly understand either one. And so I think that I don't think that I've got any other questions for you, Teddy. Is there anything else that you wanted to wrap up with?
I think that covers it. At this point, it's a wait and see moment. But I think just to emphasize once again, in this situation, workers fought and they won. And they could win more, perhaps, whether it's the next contract or it's still this contract. But that's the message I'm taking, and I think that's the message that the broader labor movement should take. When you fight, you win.
Yeah. Teddy Ostro, host of the Upsurge, freelance labor reporter. You can find his work in These Times magazine, the Real News Network, The Nation, The New Republic, I believe you've got bylines in just about everywhere. Also follow him on Twitter at Teddy Ostro. Thanks again. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.